The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside the Wells Fargo office in Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, and Theresa Kinsley knew she was in trouble before the driver even climbed down from his perch. She had been counting and recounting the coins in her reticule for the past hour, trying to make the numbers work out differently, but mathematics did not lie. She was $3 short of the fare from Denver, and she had nothing left to sell except the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring, which she would sooner die than part with. The other passengers filed out into the dusty street, their boots hitting the packed earth with solid thumps that spoke of certainty and destination. Theresa remained in her seat, her hands gripping the worn leather of her travel bag, watching through the window as the driver began unloading luggage. The September sun beat down mercilessly, and even in the shade of the coach, sweat trickled down her back beneath her dark blue traveling dress. "Miss," the driver's weathered face appeared in the doorway. "This is the end of the line. Everybody out." Theresa forced herself to stand, her legs stiff from the long journey. She stepped down into the street, nearly stumbling on the last step. The driver was already holding out his hand expectantly. "That will be $12, miss." She opened her reticule with trembling fingers and poured the contents into her palm. 9 silver dollars glinted in the harsh sunlight, along with a few smaller coins. "I have $9.30, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I had enough, but I miscalculated the fare from Denver." The driver's expression hardened. "The price is $12. It is posted clear as day on the board. I know, and I am terribly sorry." Theresa could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, curious and judgmental. Heat that had nothing to do with the weather rose in her cheeks. "Perhaps I could send you the remainder once I find employment. I am here to meet my aunt, and she can help me repay you." "No credit," the driver said flatly. "Company policy. You either pay or I take your bag for collateral, and you can collect it when you have the full amount." Everything she owned in the world was in that bag. Her spare dress, her mother's Bible, the letters from her aunt promising her a home and a fresh start after the factory fire in Philadelphia had left her with nothing. "Please," she said, hating the desperation in her voice. "I have nowhere else to go." "That is not my problem, miss." The driver reached for her bag. "How much is she short?" The voice came from behind her, low and steady, with the distinctive drawl of someone who had spent his life under western skies. Theresa turned to find herself looking up at a man who seemed to embody everything she had imagined about the frontier. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against a dusty brown shirt. His face was tanned and angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking gray-blue that seemed to see straight through all her carefully maintained composure to the frightened woman beneath. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark brown hair that needed a trim, and a gun belt sat low on his hips with the casual confidence of someone who knew how to use it. He could not have been much older than she was, perhaps 25 to her 22 years, but he carried himself with a quiet authority that made him seem older. $3, give or take," the driver said, his tone notably more respectful. The stranger did not take his eyes off Theresa as he reached into his pocket and produced a small leather purse. He counted out 3 silver dollars and handed them to the driver. "That square it." "Yes, sir, Mr. Irwin. Much obliged." The driver touched his hat and pocketed the money. "Wait," Theresa said quickly. "I cannot accept this. I do not even know you." The man called Irwin finally looked away from her, tipping his hat slightly. "Name is Quinn Irwin. I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here, and you are not accepting anything, miss." I am paying a debt that is owed to the stage company. How you pay me back is between you and me. I do not understand. Well, you have two choices as I see it. His expression was serious but not unkind. You can refuse my help and lose your bag, or you can accept it and we can discuss terms. I am in need of help at my ranch. My housekeeper left last month to care for her sick mother back east, and the place is falling apart without her. You work off what you owe me, and we call it even. Theresa's mind raced. Everything her mother had taught her about propriety screamed at her to refuse, to find another way, but what other way was there? She knew no one in Cheyenne except her aunt, whom she had never met in person. She had no money for lodging, no prospects, and winter was coming. The frontier was no place for a woman alone without resources. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked. Something flickered in his eyes that might have been respect. "Fair question. Tell you what, I need to speak to the sheriff anyway. We can walk over to his office and you can ask him about me. Jake Thornton and I have known each other since we were boys. He will tell you whether I am the sort of man who can be trusted." The offer was more than fair, more than she had any right to expect from a stranger. Theresa nodded slowly. "Very well. But I want to make it clear that I intend to repay every cent, with interest if necessary." "No interest," Quinn said firmly. "Just honest work. Can you cook?" "Yes, and clean, so tend a garden and keep accounts. My mother ran a boarding house before she died." "Then we will get along just fine." He picked up her bag as if it weighed nothing and gestured toward a building down the street with a star-shaped badge hanging over the door. "After you, Miss Kinsley. Theresa Kinsley." They walked in silence through the busy street, passing saloons and shops, a hotel with a faded sign, and a general store with barrels of goods stacked outside. Cheyenne was larger than Theresa had expected, bustling with cowboys, miners, railroad workers, and settlers. The buildings were mostly wooden, some painted and some weathered to gray, and the boardwalks rang with the sound of boots and spurs. The sheriff's office was small but neat, with wanted posters tacked to the wall outside and a hitching post where two horses dozed in the sun. Quinn opened the door and held it for her, and Theresa stepped into the relative coolness of the interior. A man in his late 30s sat behind a desk, his boots propped up as he read a newspaper. He looked up as they entered, and a grin split his face. "Quinn Irwin. I was wondering when you would drag yourself into town. You are getting as antisocial as old Tom Henderson, and he has not left his cabin in 3 years." "I have been busy," Quinn said mildly. "Jake, this is Miss Theresa Kinsley. She just arrived from the East and finds herself in need of employment. I have offered her work at the ranch, but she sensibly wants to know if I am likely to murder her in her sleep before she accepts." Jake swung his feet down and stood, his expression sobering. "Miss Kinsley, Quinn Irwin is one of the most honest men I know. His word is his bond, and he has never given me cause to doubt his character. If he says he needs help at the ranch and will pay you fair wages, you can believe him." "Thank you, Sheriff," Theresa said. "I appreciate your candor." "How long has it been since Martha left?" Jake asked Quinn. "6 weeks, give or take. I have been living on beans and hardtack, and the house looks like a tornado went through it. I am not built for domestic work." "No, you surely are not." Jake turned back to Theresa. "The Irwin Ranch is a good property, about 500 acres with decent water and grass. Quinn runs cattle and horses, does all right for himself. The house is solid, built by his father 20 years back. You would have your own room, and Quinn's ranch hand Ernesto bunks in the barn, so you would not be alone with Quinn in the house." This information helped ease some of Theresa's concerns, though she could not entirely quiet her mother's voice in her head warning about impropriety. But what choice did she have? She turned to Quinn. How long would I need to work to repay the $3? I was planning to pay Martha $20 a month plus room and board, Quinn said. By my calculation, $3 would be about 4 or 5 days of work, but I would ask you to stay on at least through the winter. Getting someone out to the ranch in the cold months is difficult, and I cannot spare the time to come into town every week looking for help. If you find the arrangement does not suit you come spring, you can leave with my blessing and a good reference. $20 a month was more than fair, more than she had made at the factory. Room and board meant she would not need to spend a penny of it, could save every cent toward building a future, and winter was indeed coming. Theresa made her decision. I accept your offer, Mr. Irwin. When do we leave? Soon as I load the supplies I came for. Should have you out to the ranch before dark if we leave within the hour. He glanced at Jake. You planning to ride out to the Turner place any time soon? I heard there was some trouble with rustlers. Tomorrow, most likely. You see anything suspicious on your land? No, but I have been keeping a closer watch. Lost 2 head last month, but they might have just wandered off. Fences are not what they should be. The two men talked about local matters while Theresa stood near the door, suddenly feeling the full weight of what she had just agreed to. She was going to live on an isolated ranch with a man she had just met, miles from town, dependent on his goodwill and honesty. It was madness by any civilized standard, but this was not Philadelphia. This was Wyoming territory in 1882, where the rules were different and survival often meant taking risks. At least Quinn Irwin had not looked at her the way some men did, with speculation and hunger. His gaze had been direct and assessing, but respectful. She would have to trust her instincts, and her instincts said he was a good man. They left the sheriff's office and walked to the general store, where Quinn proceeded to order an impressive array of supplies. Flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, canned goods, fabric, lamp oil, ammunition, and a dozen other items that the storekeeper's assistant packed into crates. Theresa watched with growing alarm as the pile grew. "Mr. Irwin," she said quietly, "how much does all this cost?" "About $60, he said absently, examining a new bridle. "I only come to town once a month or so, need to stock up, $60. It was an enormous sum, but he paid it without hesitation, counting out the bills from a worn wallet. Clearly, Sheriff Thornton had been right about the ranch doing well. The storekeeper treated Quinn with the deference reserved for valued customers, throwing in an extra pound of coffee and some peppermint sticks for the lady. They loaded everything into a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient draft horses. Quinn lifted her bag into the back with the supplies, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. The sun was past its zenith as they rolled out of Cheyenne, heading north on a road that quickly dwindled to little more than a pair of wagon ruts across the prairie. The grassland stretched out in every direction, golden in the autumn light, broken occasionally by outcroppings of rock and scattered stands of cottonwoods following the path of unseen creeks. Theresa had seen open country from the train and stage coach windows, but being out in the middle of it was different. The sky seemed impossibly vast, an inverted bowl of brilliant blue that made her feel tiny and insignificant. The wind blew constantly, carrying the scent of dried grass and sage. "It is very open," she said after a while, needing to break the silence. "Takes some getting used to if you are from the city," Quinn agreed. "Some people cannot stand it, say it makes them feel exposed. Me, I cannot imagine living anywhere else. Tried going to St. Louis once when I was younger. Lasted 3 weeks before I had to get back." "How long have you had the ranch?" "It was my father's. He homesteaded the land in '62, built the house and barn, started the herd. I was 5 years old when we came out from Missouri. My mother died the second winter, and it was just me and him after that until he passed 4 years ago. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching and horses. Quinn glanced at her. What about your people? You said your mother died. 2 years ago, pneumonia. My father died when I was very young. I do not really remember him. After my mother passed, I went to work at a textile factory to support myself. Theresa paused, the memory still painful. There was a fire 3 weeks ago. The building was old, the exits were locked. 15 people died. I got out through a window, but I lost everything I could not carry. My aunt in Cheyenne wrote and told me to come stay with her, said she could help me find work. She runs a millinery shop, or at least she did the last I heard from her. What is her name? I might know her. Hannah Preston. Quinn was quiet for a moment. Miss Kinsley, I am sorry to tell you this, but Hannah Preston died last spring. She took a fever and it went to her lungs. Jake would have told you if you had mentioned her name. The words hit Theresa like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the wagon seat, suddenly dizzy. Dead. But she wrote to me in July. I have the letter in my bag. Must have been written before she fell ill. The shop is closed now. Her husband sold the stock and moved back east to live with his son from his first marriage. Theresa could not speak. The careful plan she had built in her mind, the future she had been counting on, crumbled to dust. She had come all this way for nothing. If Quinn had not paid her fare, she would have been stranded in Cheyenne with no money and no prospects, not even the aunt she had never met but had pinned all her hopes on. I know it is not much comfort, Quinn said gently, but you have work now and a place to stay. That is more than a lot of people can say. You can figure out what comes next once you have your feet under you. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough in the past weeks. What she needed now was strength. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels, the clopping of the horses' hooves, and the whisper of the wind. Gradually, Theresa's composure returned. Quinn was right. She had work and shelter. It was more than she had any right to expect given how the day had started. Tell me about the ranch, she said at last. What will my duties be? Quinn seemed relieved at the change of subject. Cooking, mainly. 3 meals a day for me and Ernesto, though he usually eats breakfast before I am up. Cleaning the house, doing laundry, mending when needed. I have chickens, so collecting eggs and feeding them. There is a vegetable garden, but most everything is harvested now. You would need to help with preserving what is left. I have been letting it go to waste since Martha left, which is a crime. I can do all that. Will I be expected to help with the ranch work? No. I have Ernesto for that, and we manage well enough. Though if you want to learn to ride, I can teach you. It is useful out here to be able to handle a horse. I would like that, Theresa said, surprising herself. She had never been on a horse in her life, but the idea of riding across these open spaces had a sudden appeal. The miles passed steadily. Quinn pointed out landmarks, a distinctive red rock formation, the line of trees that marked the Crow Creek, the distant mountains hazy on the western horizon. He talked about the ranch, the cattle and horses, the challenges of making a living from the land. His voice was easy to listen to, and Theresa found herself relaxing despite everything. The sun was low in the sky when they topped a rise, and Quinn said, "There it is." Theresa looked down into a broad valley where a collection of buildings nestled against the slope. The house was larger than she had expected, 2 stories with a covered porch running along the front. The barn was substantial, built of weathered wood with a stone foundation. There were several smaller outbuildings, corrals with horses moving lazily in the golden light, and fields that stretched toward the creek. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. The ranch had a solid, permanent look, as if it had grown out of the land itself. My father chose the location well. Good water, shelter from the worst of the wind, decent grass. We have done all right here. There was quiet pride in Quinn's voice. As they descended into the valley, a man emerged from the barn. He was older than Quinn, perhaps 40, with dark skin weathered by sun and wind, and black hair going gray at the temples. He watched their approach with curiosity. Quinn pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. "Ernesto, this is Miss Theresa Kinsley. She's going to be our new housekeeper." "Miss Kinsley, this is Ernesto Vega. He has been working here since my father's time." Ernesto removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Welcome, Miss Kinsley. It is good to have someone to look after the house again. Quinn is a fine rancher but a terrible cook." "I am not that bad," Quinn protested. "The beans last week were hard as rocks, and the bread could have been used to build a wall," Ernesto said, but there was affection in his tone. "Come, I will help unload the wagon." They carried the supplies into the house while Theresa stood on the porch, looking around at what was to be her new home. The view from here was even more impressive, with the valley spreading out in shades of gold and amber, the creek glinting in the distance, and the endless sky above. The front door opened directly into a large main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room combined. A big iron stove dominated one wall, with work surfaces and shelves for dishes and supplies. A sturdy table with 6 chairs sat in the center, and near the stone fireplace were 2 comfortable-looking chairs and a small sofa. Stairs at the back led to the second floor. The room was, as Quinn had warned, a disaster. Dirty dishes were stacked on the table and work surfaces. The floor needed sweeping. Cobwebs decorated the corners, and everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. But the bones of the space were good. Solid construction, large windows letting in plenty of light, and enough room to work comfortably. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the left," Quinn said, setting down a crate of canned goods. "Martha kept it neat, so it should be in better shape than down here. My room is at the end of the hall. There is a spare room too in case we have visitors, though that is rare." Theresa picked up her bag and climbed the stairs, her legs protesting after the long day. The room Quinn had indicated was indeed much cleaner than the main floor. It was simply furnished with a bed covered by a faded quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a chair by the window. Someone had hung cheerful yellow curtains, and a braided rug covered the wooden floor. She set down her bag and went to the window. It looked out over the front of the property, toward the creek and the mountains beyond. As she watched, the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. It was the most spectacular sunset she had ever seen. A knock on the doorframe made her turn. Quinn stood in the hallway, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I know you must be exhausted, but if you feel up to it, something to eat would be welcome. I can make do with bread and cheese if you would rather rest." Theresa straightened her shoulders. "I agreed to work for my keep, Mr. Irwin. Give me a few minutes to freshen up and I will see what I can do about supper." Relief crossed his face. "Thank you. I will get a fire started in the stove." She unpacked her few belongings quickly, hanging her spare dress in the small wardrobe and arranging her mother's Bible and letters on the dresser. After washing her face and hands in the basin, she changed into an older dress more suitable for work and tied an apron around her waist. Downstairs, Quinn had indeed gotten a fire going in the stove and was making a valiant but clearly unsuccessful attempt to clear the table. Theresa shooed him away, and began assessing what she had to work with. The supplies they had brought were still in crates, but she found potatoes in a bin, onions hanging in a net, and eggs in a basket that showed the chickens, at least, were still being tended. Within an hour, she had produced a simple but substantial meal of fried potatoes and onions, scrambled eggs, and bread from the general store toasted over the stove. It was not fancy, but it was hot and plentiful. Quinn and Ernesto ate with the focus of hungry men, complimenting her cooking with a sincerity that was touching. "This is the best meal I have had in weeks," Quinn said, mopping up the last of his eggs with a piece of toast. "I think we are going to get along just fine, Miss Kinsley." After dinner, Ernesto excused himself to the barn while Theresa insisted on washing the dishes. Quinn dried them and put them away, and they worked in companionable silence. When everything was clean and the kitchen was restored to a semblance of order, Theresa found herself swaying with exhaustion. "Go on up to bed," Quinn said. "You have done more than enough for one day. Tomorrow will be soon enough to tackle the rest." Theresa was too tired to argue. She climbed the stairs feeling as though she could sleep for a week. In her room, she changed into her nightgown, brushed out her long brown hair, and slipped between sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. The bed was comfortable, the room was quiet, and despite everything that had happened, she felt safe. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was that Quinn Irwin had kind eyes and a good heart, and perhaps Wyoming Territory would not be such a bad place to start over after all. The rooster woke her at dawn, its crowing insistent and impossible to ignore. Theresa dressed quickly in the morning chill and made her way downstairs, where she found the main room empty and quiet. Through the window, she could see Ernesto moving around the barn, but there was no sign of Quinn. She got a fire started in the stove, grateful for the skills her mother had taught her, and set water to boil for coffee. In the pantry, she found cornmeal and began mixing up batter for johnny cakes. By the time Quinn appeared, dressed in work clothes and looking like he had already been up for hours, she had breakfast well underway. "Morning," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "You did not have to get up so early. I usually make do with coffee and whatever is handy." "Breakfast is the most important meal of the day," Theresa said, flipping the cakes on the griddle. "My mother always said a man cannot work on an empty stomach. Your mother was a wise woman." Quinn poured himself coffee from the pot and sat at the table, watching her work. "You settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you. The room is very comfortable." She plated the johnny cakes and brought them to the table along with butter and the last of some preserves she had found in the pantry. "What are your plans for today?" "Ernesto and I need to ride out to the east pasture and check on the cattle. Some of them need to be brought closer to the ranch before the weather turns. We will be gone most of the day." He paused. "Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course. I have plenty to do." "This house needs a thorough cleaning." Quinn nodded, but she caught a flicker of concern in his eyes. "The rifle is in the corner by the door. You know how to use one?" "No." "I will teach you when I get back. It is unlikely you will need it, but out here it is best to be prepared. If anyone comes by that you do not know, you stay inside and do not open the door. Most folks are honest, but not all." The words should have frightened her, but instead they reminded her that Quinn was taking seriously his responsibility for her safety. "I will be careful." He finished his breakfast quickly, praising her cooking again, and headed out. Theresa watched through the window as he and Ernesto saddled horses and rode off, disappearing into the grassland. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The house was in worse shape than she had realized the night before. It took her all morning just to wash the accumulated dishes, scrub the work surfaces, and sweep the floors. She found sheets and blankets that needed washing and set water to heat for the laundry. By midday, she had filled the line behind the house with linens flapping in the wind. As she worked, she began to understand the rhythm of the place. The chickens needed to be fed and the eggs collected. There was wood to be brought in for the stove. The pantry needed organizing, and she made a mental list of supplies that were running low. It was hard work, but it was honest and straightforward, and she found satisfaction in seeing order emerge from chaos. The afternoon was wearing on when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Remembering Quinn's warning, she wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. 2 riders were coming up the valley, but as they drew closer, she recognized Quinn's tall figure and relaxed. They rode into the yard, and she noticed immediately that something was wrong. One of the horses was limping, and Quinn was cradling his left arm against his chest. Theresa hurried out onto the porch. "What happened?" she called. "Just a little accident," Quinn said, dismounting carefully. "Horse spooked at her rattlesnake and threw me. I am fine, but Duke here pulled up lame." "Ernesto, can you check his leg?" "Of course." Ernesto took the limping horse's reins and led him toward the barn. Quinn walked to the porch, and Theresa could see that fine was an overstatement. His face was pale beneath the tan, and he was moving stiffly. "Let me see that arm," she said firmly. "It is nothing, just bruised." "Mr. Irwin, I have seen enough injuries to know when someone needs attention. Come inside." For a moment she thought he would argue, but then he nodded and followed her into the house. She pulled out a chair and made him sit, then carefully helped him out of his jacket and shirt. His left shoulder and upper arm were already showing an impressive bruise, and he winced as she probed gently. "I do not think anything is broken," she said, "but you are going to be sore for a while. Hold still." She fetched cold water from the pump and made a compress, holding it against the worst of the bruising. Quinn sat quietly, watching her face as she worked. "You are good at this," he said after a while. "I worked in a factory, remember? People got hurt all the time. I learned basic nursing out of necessity." She refreshed the compress. "You should rest this evening. I will handle dinner and any other chores that need doing." "Miss Kinsley, you have been working all day. I can see that just by looking at the house. It has not been this clean since Martha left. And you have been working all day too, and you got thrown from a horse. Rest. That is an order." A smile tugged at his mouth. "You are bossy when someone is injured. Someone has to be sensible, and clearly it is not going to be you." But she smiled as she said it, and he smiled back, and something warm unfurled in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. Over the next few weeks, Theresa settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke with the sun, prepared meals, cleaned, did laundry, tended the chickens, and slowly brought order to the household. Quinn's shoulder healed, and he taught her to shoot the rifle, standing behind her to adjust her stance and arms, his presence solid and steady. She learned the names of all the horses, including Duke, who recovered from his limp and came to nuzzle her pockets looking for the bits of apple she learned to carry. She learned to read the weather in the clouds and the wind, to bake bread in the temperamental stove, to preserve vegetables and prepare for winter. And she learned about Quinn. He was patient and fair, with a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise. He treated Ernesto with respect and friendship, not as a subordinate. He worked from dawn to dusk without complaint, cared deeply about his animals, and kept his word on every matter large and small. He also had a habit of watching her when he thought she was not looking, and she found herself watching him in return. The way he moved, economical and sure. The way his face softened when he talked about his father. The way his rare, full smiles transformed him from handsome to devastating. October arrived, bringing cooler nights and the first hints of winter. One evening after dinner, Quinn asked if she would like to go riding the next day. "I need to check the line shacks before snow comes," he said. "It would be a good chance for you to see more of the property. We would be back by evening." "I would like that," Theresa said, "but I have never ridden for that long. Are you sure I would be able to keep up?" "We will take it slow. And Daisy is the gentlest horse I own. You will be fine." They set out the next morning under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Theresa wore her split riding skirt, a borrowed jacket against the chill, and her most practical boots. Quinn had saddled Daisy, a placid mare with kind eyes, and helped Theresa mount. They rode north, following the creek into rougher country. Quinn was a good teacher, patiently correcting her seat and hand position, showing her how to work with the horse rather than against it. Gradually, Theresa relaxed and began to enjoy herself. The world looked different from horseback, bigger and more immediate. They stopped at the first line shack around midday. It was a small but sturdy structure, used by the ranch hands during spring and fall roundup. Quinn checked the supplies stored there, made notes of what needed replenishing, and ensured the roof was sound. "Winter can come on fast out here," he explained as they ate the lunch she had packed. "If someone gets caught out in a storm, these shacks can mean the difference between life and death." "How bad do the storms get?" "Bad enough. Some years we lose cattle in the blizzards. 2 years ago I lost a horse. Got trapped in a draw when the snow came and could not get back to shelter." His expression was grim. "It is a hard country, Miss Kinsley. Beautiful but hard. It does not forgive mistakes. You love it anyway." "Yes, this land is in my blood. I cannot imagine living anywhere else." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? Do you miss the city?" Theresa considered the question. "I miss some things. The convenience of shops close by, the theater, the sense of being part of something larger. But I do not miss the factory, the smoke, the noise, the feeling of being just another cog in a machine. Here the work I do matters. I can see the results and the land." She gestured at the vista spread before them. "It is stark, but there is a beauty to it I never expected." "You are adapting well. Not everyone can." "I do not have much choice, do I? But honestly, I am glad I came, even though things did not work out the way I planned." They rode on to the second line shack, following a trail that climbed into the foothills. The view from there was breathtaking. The valley spread out below them, the ranch buildings looking like toys in the distance. They could see for miles in every direction, and Theresa felt suddenly dizzy with the immensity of it all. On the ride back, as the sun was sinking toward the western mountains, Quinn said quietly, "I want you to know that you are more than just hired help, Miss Kinsley. You have become part of the place. I hope you will consider staying on after the winter, not out of obligation, but because you want to." Theresa looked at him, sitting easy in his saddle, his profile sharp against the sky. Her heart did a strange little flip in her chest. "I will think about it," she said, though in truth she had already made her decision. She could not imagine leaving now. Winter arrived in earnest in mid-November, with storms that howled down from the north and buried the valley in snow. The days fell into a different rhythm, with much of the work focused on keeping the animals fed and the paths clear. Theresa learned to navigate drifts that came up to her knees, to bundle against cold so fierce it burned her lungs, to appreciate the solid warmth of the house. The three of them, Quinn, Ernesto, and Theresa, became a tight unit, working together to survive the harsh season. They shared meals, stories, and the occasional evening of card games by the fire. Theresa mended clothes and read aloud from Quinn's small collection of books. Quinn taught her to play chess, and she discovered she had a knack for it. As the weeks passed, she became increasingly aware of Quinn's presence. The accidental brush of hands when passing dishes. The way he held her elbow when they walked on icy ground. the timbre of his voice when he said her name, which at some point had shifted from Miss Kinsley to Theresa, though she could not recall exactly when. She thought about him more than she should, lying in her bed at night listening to the wind. Wondered what it would be like to feel his arms around her, to know that she belonged to someone and they belonged to her. She had never felt this way about a man before, this constant awareness, this yearning. Christmas came, and they made what celebration they could. Theresa baked pies and a cake, and Quinn surprised her with a bolt of blue fabric from his last trip to town. "I noticed your dresses are getting worn," he said, looking embarrassed. "I thought you might like something new." It was the most thoughtful gift she had ever received. She held the fabric to her chest, blinking back tears. "Thank you, Quinn. I will make something beautiful." On Christmas evening, after Ernesto had gone to the barn, Quinn and Theresa sat by the fire. The wind howled outside, but the house was warm and bright with lamplight. "I have been thinking," Quinn said abruptly, "about the future, about what I want." Theresa's heart began to pound. "And what do you want?" He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I want you to stay, not as an employee, as my wife." The words hung in the air between them. Theresa stared at him, torn between joy and uncertainty. "Quinn, I know this is sudden," he said quickly. "And I know I am not good with words, but I have come to care for you, Theresa, more than I thought possible. You have brought life back to this place, to me. I do not want to imagine waking up and not finding you here. If you do not feel the same, tell me and we will never speak of it again. But if there is even a chance that you might come to care for me too, I am asking you to give us that chance." Theresa's mind raced. She had known her feelings for Quinn had deepened, but she had not let herself hope he felt the same. He was offering her not just security, but a home, a partnership, a future. And more than that, he was offering his heart. "I do feel the same," she said softly. "I have for a while now. I just did not think you could want someone like me, a factory girl from the city with nothing to her name." Quinn reached out and took her hands in his. "You have everything that matters: strength, kindness, courage. You came to a strange place with nothing and made it your home. You work hard and never complain. You laugh at my bad jokes and beat me at chess. You are exactly what I want, Theresa. Will you marry me?" She looked into his eyes, those gray-blue eyes that had been the first thing she noticed about him, and saw her future there. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and hearing the steady beat of his heart. He kissed the top of her head, and then she tilted her face up, and their lips met in a kiss that was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling. "When?" Theresa asked. "As soon as we can get to town. I am not waiting any longer than necessary to make you my wife." The weather cleared after the New Year, and on a bright January morning they made the journey to Cheyenne. Sheriff Jake Thornton agreed to stand up with Quinn, and they found a minister who was willing to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. Theresa wore a new dress she had made from the blue fabric Quinn had given her, and she carried a small bouquet of dried flowers. There were no crowds, no elaborate celebration, just a simple exchange of vows in a small church with Jake and his wife as witnesses. But when Quinn slipped a plain gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Theresa felt like the most blessed woman in the world. This was real, this was lasting, and this was love. They stayed in town that night at the hotel, and Quinn showed her with tender passion what it meant to be joined together as husband and wife. Theresa had been nervous, but Quinn was patient and gentle, and by the time the night was over, she understood what all the fuss was about. The next morning they started the journey back to the ranch, but not before stopping at the general store. Quinn bought supplies and then turned to Theresa with a mischievous look. "Pick out whatever you want, anything at all. Quinn, you have already been so generous. You are my wife now. I want to spoil you a little." He leaned close and whispered, "Besides, I can afford it. The ranch has done very well, and I have been saving for years with no one to spend it on." So Theresa allowed herself to choose things she would never have dared to want before. Good fabric for new dresses, lace for trimming, a new pair of boots, books, ribbons, a beautiful shawl. Quinn added a music box that played a tinkling waltz, saying, "Every woman should have something pretty that serves no practical purpose." Ernesto greeted their return with unfeigned delight, pumping Quinn's hand and congratulating them both. "I thought you would never work up the courage to ask her," he said, laughing at Quinn's embarrassed expression. "It has been as clear as day to anyone with eyes that you two were meant for each other." The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Theresa reveled in her new role as Quinn's wife, in the freedom to touch him whenever she wanted, to kiss him goodnight and wake up in his arms. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing their pasts, their hopes, their dreams. She learned that he wanted children, that he had always imagined a house full of them. She confessed that she had always wanted the same but had given up hope after her mother died. "We will have our family," Quinn promised, "as many children as you want." Spring arrived with a rush of green growth and newborn animals. The ranch burst into activity, with cattle calving and horses foaling. Quinn hired 2 additional ranch hands for the season, young men from town who treated Theresa with respect and appreciation for her cooking. In May, Theresa realized she was pregnant. She told Quinn one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and his whoop of joy brought Ernesto running from the barn to see what was wrong. "Nothing is wrong," Quinn said, grinning so wide his face looked like it might split. "Everything is right. We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Quinn became even more protective, trying to keep her from working too hard, though she laughed at his concerns and continued with her usual routines. By October, her belly was round and prominent, and the baby kicked vigorously. On a cold January morning, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Theresa went into labor. Quinn rode to fetch the doctor from Cheyenne, pushing the horses hard through the snow. The doctor arrived in time, and after several hours of hard work, Theresa delivered a healthy baby boy. Quinn held his son with awe-struck wonder, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Thank you, Theresa. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas Matthew Irwin, and he became the center of their world. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, taking the baby with him around the ranch whenever possible, showing him the horses and cattle and land that would one day be his. 2 years later, Theresa gave birth to a daughter they named Lily Ann. She had her father's gray-blue eyes and her mother's brown hair, and Quinn declared she was the most beautiful baby ever born. 2 years after that came another boy, Samuel Quinn, and then 3 years later, twin girls, Emma Rose and Sarah Jane. The house that had once seemed too big and empty now rang with laughter and the sound of running feet. Quinn expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land as it became available, building the herd, earning a reputation for quality horses and honest dealing. Theresa watched her children grow with a joy she had never imagined possible. Thomas grew tall and serious, with his father's steady nature. Lily was bright and curious, always asking questions. Samuel was the daredevil, giving them all gray hairs with his antics. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in a language only they understood. The years rolled past, marked by seasons and births and the slow accumulation of a life well lived. Ernesto grew older but remained a fixture on the ranch, beloved by the children who called him Uncle Ernesto. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Theresa riding to the spot where they had stopped on that first long ride together, the place where they could see the whole valley spread out below them. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here, marrying me, giving up the life you might have had in the city?" Theresa looked at the man she loved, at the face that had become more dear to her than her own. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Quinn. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love." "How could I regret that? I am the one who should be grateful," he said, pulling her close. "That day in Cheyenne, I thought I was just helping a woman in trouble. I never imagined I was meeting my future wife, the mother of my children, the other half of my soul." $3, Theresa mused. "That is what it cost you to change both our lives. $3 for a stagecoach fare. Best investment I ever made." Quinn kissed her, and she kissed him back, and the wind whispered through the grass around them, carrying the scent of sage and home. 20 years after that day in Cheyenne, Theresa stood on the porch of the ranch house and watched her grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas had married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over and had 3 children of his own. He ran the ranch alongside his father now, and Quinn was finally allowing himself to slow down a little, to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Lily had married a doctor and lived in Cheyenne, but she visited often with her 2 children. Samuel was still unmarried, working the ranch and breaking horses with a skill that was legendary in the region. The twins had just finished school and were being courted by half the eligible young men in the territory, though they claimed they were in no hurry to marry. Quinn came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. At 53, he was silver at the temples but still strong and vital. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. The day we met, how scared I was, how hopeless I felt. And how one act of kindness from a stranger changed everything. I was not being kind. I was being selfish. I saw you standing there, stubborn and proud even in defeat, and I thought, that is a woman I want to know. I would have paid $100, $1,000, just for the chance." Theresa turned in his arms to face him. "And I thought you had kind eyes and a good heart, and I was willing to risk everything on that judgment. I was right. We were both right." Quinn kissed her forehead. "We have built a good life, you and I." "The best life," Theresa agreed. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner, crowding around the big table that Quinn had built to accommodate their growing numbers. The room was full of noise and laughter, of multiple conversations happening at once, of children begging for stories and Quinn obliging with tales of the old days. Theresa looked around at the faces she loved and felt a profound gratitude. She thought about the girl she had been, desperate and alone in a strange town, and the woman she had become, surrounded by family and love. She thought about the cowboy who had paid her fare when she could not, who had given her a chance when she needed one most. And she thanked God for $3 and a kind heart, for a stagecoach ride and a stranger's generosity, for everything that had flowed from that single moment of grace. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and horses sold for good prices, children who gave them worry and grandchildren who gave them delight. Through it all, Quinn and Theresa stood together, their love a constant in a changing world. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, they celebrated with a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors from miles around. Sheriff Jake Thornton, now semi-retired, gave a speech about the old days and how far they had all come. He raised his glass to Quinn and Theresa, calling them an example of what was best about the West: hard work, integrity, and devotion to family. The new century arrived, and with it came changes. Barbed wire crisscrossed the open range. The railroad brought more people and more civilization. The wild frontier of their youth was becoming tamed, settled, ordinary. But the ranch endured, passed from Quinn to Thomas and his children, a legacy built on love and determination. Quinn and Theresa grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved, holding hands like the newlyweds they still were in their hearts. On a warm spring evening in 1915, 33 years after they had met, Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep, Theresa holding his hand. He was 75 years old and had lived to see his children grown, his grandchildren thriving, and his great-grandchildren beginning to make their mark on the world. The ranch he had inherited from his father and built into something substantial would continue for generations. Theresa mourned him deeply, but she did not despair. She had been blessed with more than 30 years of happiness with a good man, had raised 5 children and seen them raise children of their own. She had lived a life of purpose and meaning, had loved and been loved in return. She remained on the ranch, living in the house Quinn had brought her to so many years before. Her children and grandchildren visited often, and she was never lonely. She tended her garden, helped with the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and told stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. Her favorite story was always the same: the tale of a desperate young woman on a stage coach who could not pay her fare, and the cowboy who paid it for her without expecting anything in return. How she had knocked on his ranch door 3 months later, not knowing her aunt had died, not knowing where else to go. How he had given her work and shelter and then his heart. $3, she would say, her eyes distant with memory. That is what it took to change my life. 3 silver dollars, and a man with kind eyes. Theresa lived to be 87 years old, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that she had lived fully and loved deeply. When she passed away peacefully in 1925, she was buried next to Quinn on a hillside overlooking the valley, where they could rest together and watch over the land they had loved. At her funeral, Thomas stood before the assembled crowd, 4 generations of Irwins along with neighbors and friends from throughout the region, and told the story one last time. How his mother had arrived in Wyoming territory with nothing but a bag of clothes and a heart full of courage. How his father had seen something special in her and taken a chance. How that chance had blossomed into a love that had lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The ranch continued to thrive, run by Thomas, and then by his children and grandchildren after him. The house was preserved and cared for, still solid and strong. The valley remained beautiful, the mountains still rose in the distance, and the wind still whispered through the grass. And on quiet evenings when the sun set in shades of gold and crimson, those who lived on the ranch swore they could feel the presence of Quinn and Theresa, still watching over the land they had loved, still together as they had been in life. Their love story became a legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation as an example of how a single act of kindness could change the course of lives. The music box Quinn had bought Theresa on the day after their wedding was passed down through the family, from daughter to daughter, a treasured heirloom. Each woman who received it heard the story of the cowboy and the woman on the stage coach, and learned the lesson that love could be found in the most unexpected places, with the most unexpected people. Samuel eventually married in his 30s to a schoolteacher from Cheyenne, and they had 4 children who loved the ranch as much as their father did. Lily's children became successful in their own right, one a lawyer and another a teacher, but they all came back to the ranch for holidays and summer visits, drawn by the land and the memories. The twins married brothers from a neighboring ranch, and the 2 families merged their properties, creating an even larger operation. They had children who married and had children of their own, until the family tree became so complex it required a chart to keep track of all the branches. Through wars and depression, through droughts and floods, through all the changes that swept across the country in the 20th century, the Irwin Ranch endured. The family stayed close, bound by blood and by the stories of their ancestors, by the land itself and what it represented. When the ranch celebrated its centennial in 1962, over 200 people gathered to mark the occasion. They toured the original house, now a museum of sorts but still lived in by the current generation. They saw Theresa's kitchen, carefully preserved, and Quinn's favorite chair by the fireplace. They looked at photographs and letters, at Theresa's Bible and Quinn's gun belt, at all the artifacts of a life well lived. The oldest attendee was Samuel and his wife's youngest daughter, now in her 70s, who had been born in the house and still remembered her grandmother Theresa. She stood before the crowd and told the story one more time, her voice strong and clear despite her age. "My grandmother used to say that God puts people in our path for a reason," she said. "That day in Cheyenne, when my grandfather paid her fare, he did not know he was meeting his future wife. He just knew someone needed help, and he was in a position to give it. That simple act of kindness grew into all of this." She gestured at the crowd, at the land, at everything the family had become. "We are all here because one man saw a woman in trouble and decided to help." Never underestimate the power of a kind deed. The crowd applauded, and there were tears in many eyes. The story had lost none of its power over the decades, had become, if anything, more meaningful as the world grew more complex and uncertain. It was a reminder that love and kindness still mattered, that the choices individuals made could have far-reaching consequences. The ranch continues to this day, now in its 5th and 6th generations of Irwin ownership. The land has been carefully stewarded, the buildings maintained, the traditions preserved. Modern equipment and methods have been adopted where they make sense, but the core values Quinn and Theresa instilled remain unchanged. Hard work, integrity, respect for the land, and devotion to family. The house on the hill still stands, solid and strong, just as it was when Quinn first brought Theresa home. The porch where they sat together on countless evenings still offers the same sweeping view of the valley. The barn where Ernesto once lived has been rebuilt twice, but occupies the same footprint. The land itself, 500 acres grown to several thousand, remains beautiful and productive. And on a shelf in the main house, carefully preserved under glass, sits a small display. 3 silver dollars, polished and mounted with a plaque that reads, "The price of a stage-coach fare, the beginning of a love story, the foundation of a family." Paid by Quinn Irwin for Theresa Kinsley, September 1882. Visitors to the ranch often ask about the display, and the current generation of Irwins is always happy to tell the story. It never gets old, never loses its power to move people. Because at its heart, it is a story about the best of human nature, compassion, courage, and the transformative power of love. Quinn and Theresa's story reminds us that we never know when we might be standing at a crossroads, when a single decision might change the course of our lives. It reminds us to be kind to strangers, to offer help when we can, to look beyond the surface to see the potential in others. It reminds us that love is worth fighting for, that family is everything, and that the choices we make today will echo through generations we will never meet. In a world that often seems harsh and unforgiving, the story of the cowboy who paid her fare when she could not, and the woman who knocked on his ranch door 3 months later, stands as a testament to hope. It is proof that fairy tales can come true, that good things happen to good people, and that sometimes, just sometimes, a stranger's kindness can transform two lives into a legacy that lasts forever. The wind still blows across the Wyoming prairie, carrying the scent of sage and grass. The mountains still rise in the distance, purple in the evening light. The creek still runs through the valley, providing water for cattle and horses. And somewhere in the whispering wind, in the quiet moments between day and night, Quinn and Theresa's love story continues, eternal and unchanging, a beacon of hope for all who hear it. Their love was not complicated or dramatic. It was simple and true, built on mutual respect and growing affection, on shared work and common goals, on the everyday miracle of two people choosing each other over and over again. It was the kind of love that built the West, that created families and communities and lasting legacies. And it all began with $3 silver, a kind heart, and a woman brave enough to knock on a stranger's door.